I genuinely forgot how much I liked this show. What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel and to another video, and today I'm starting my new series of random talks about other animes that are not Demon Slayer and Medalist. If this is your first time with the channel, hello, welcome. My name is Hannah and I am primarily a Demon Slayer content creator who also makes content on Medalist because I'm a figure skater. If you're interested in seeing any of my videos on either of those animes, just go to my profile, you will have an abundance of them. But I do have thoughts on a lot of the other animes that I've seen. A lot of people think that Demon Slayer is like the only anime I've watched, and I just don't think you know what a hyperfixation is. But I have seen lots of other animes. I'm gonna do this randomized from the next video on out, but I am gonna start with My Hero Academia since the show recently ended, and I do have a lot of thoughts because I actually watched the entire thing from start to finish for the second time in preparation for the final season. So I have a lot of memory that's come back to me and that sort of thing. So we're gonna dive in, but before we do, a couple disclaimers. Number one is I am gonna be discussing spoilers for the end of the show. If you have not seen the end of My Hero Academia, put a pin in this and go watch it, come back. Another disclaimer is that everything that I'm going to say in this video is just my opinion, okay? I'm not going to say anything as objective fact. This is just going to be my thoughts on the show. That means there are going to be some positive, there are going to be some negative. So if you disagree with me and you want to talk about it in the comments, I am a-okay with that. I just ask that you keep it respectful. And then final thing to kind of go over is I'm actually going to set a timer for 20 minutes. So the goal of these videos is to keep them short and sweet and not like super long and run on without writing a script, because I hate writing scripts. I don't like the way I sound when I write a script, so I don't do that anymore, but I want to try and keep this like somewhat condensed. So we're gonna dive right in, but before we do, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment your thoughts. And also, if you're interested in being a part of this entire series of once a month videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can join in on the party. All right, 20 minutes, and here we go. I don't really know where to start, but I do really love characters. In fact, characters is what is most important to me within a story. So let's start by talking about a few of the characters. I'll start with Midoriya. So normally people would assume that Midoriya would be my favorite character in the show because I tend to lean towards those like super sunshine, very pure soul boys. Tanjiro is my favorite character in all of media. Aang is very close behind him. Midoriya is near the top of my favorite characters in My Hero Academia. I do really love his hard work ethic. I really like it when they just have to lock in and just work extra hard. That is one of the things that I really love about him, is he's very inspiring because he goes through this underdog story in a world that having a quirk is really everything. So you can't really blame him for wanting to have a quirk because you're gonna get bullied when you don't have one. And what are you supposed to do with your life? The world is starting to turn into this place where everything revolves around those. So what do you do when you are quirkless? I really found his story to be interesting. And I also found his entire character arc to be quite well done. I personally have mixed feelings about him ending the show quirkless. I think it does great things for his character, but it doesn't do great things for the story itself, and I'll kind of explain. So for his character, I actually really felt like they showed a lot of growth for him because watching season 1, like he was a very obsessive over quirks to the point of like, it was sometimes difficult for me to really get behind him fully. While I understand like the world that he lives in is so revolving around quirks that it would breed a kid like this who just feels like the world is ending because he's quirkless. I do like that he started out just so obsessive over quirks that he latched, like he hung on to All Might to ask him if he could be a hero even if he was quirkless, to the point where when he found out he was quirkless, or he was going to be quirkless, because of course like One for All, there was embers for like a couple of years before it completely went out, he was fine with it. So there was a lot of growth in that. It is kind of tough that he really only had it for a year. You know, the show was quite long and it only took place over a year, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but it kind of sucks, but it did show his growth as a character, going from this kid who was just like obsessive over quirks to a kid who was okay with not having a quirk and choosing to, you know, keep moving forward and choose a career path that would work for him. Now, while we're on the subject of the end, my issue with him being quirkless at the end is the fact that, well, I kind of like that he became a teacher for him. I don't like what that means for the story as a whole, because to me that says that society has not changed. Like, everything we just went through in the last year, nothing's really changed. The only thing that's different is that Shigaraki and All for One is no longer a threat. There will always be threats. You know, this story, it's not like I was expecting them to end quirks, right? That was never the goal. In fact, I believe that was Overhaul's goal, really was to end quirks, and they actively fought against that. This is not a story like Attack on Titan or Demon Slayer, where the obvious end goal is to kind of like end Titans and end demons so that everyone can live in peace. There's never going to be complete closure with a story like this because it's not built in a way where it can give us like that complete closure. I just feel like Midoriya having to be a teacher and only do hero work if he had this suit that essentially gave him a quirk just kind of showed that like no one really moved forward. Like the story itself didn't move forward much because he still couldn't be a hero without a quirk or that technology, which I guess technically the technology is new, but that was like my only real gripe. While we're on, I know I said I was going to talk about the characters, but while we're on the end, I do want to talk about the end because that's probably going to be what most of this video is about. I saw a lot of opinions about the end when it came out in the manga, but I didn't really engage or look at it because I wasn't a manga reader for this show ever, so I wasn't trying to get spoiled, and I actually did pretty good. I don't engage with My Hero Academia fans pretty much at all. It kind of gets to the point where I can only engage in fandoms in the shows where I'm completely caught up on the source material or okay with getting spoiled. Because if you're going to engage with a fandom for an anime where the manga is ahead of the anime, people are going to be talking about the manga, especially if it's been out for a while. So that's the main reason I didn't really engage with it, but I did see a lot of opinions come across my feed, and the majority of them were negative. So you kind of go into it with the expectation that it's not going to be very good. I was very pleasantly surprised. I felt the ending was as much closure as we really could get. Sure, there could have been a little bit more closure. You know, they could have given us some more closure on Midoriya and Uraraka. Like, did they actually end up together? I feel like that was kind of obvious, though. You don't have to have, like, straight up just confirmation verbally for you to know. Some of the other characters, you know, didn't get a ton of development. So there's always going to be things about an ending that you don't really like. I have yet to see a story actually just have a 10 out of 10 ending. I would say even Avatar Last Airbender doesn't have a 10 out of 10 ending. I would call it like a 9.5 out of 10 because there's like two things about the ending that is like a little bit not my favorite thing in the world. So with what they had and with how the story was built, I felt like them, you know, kind of jumping through the last few years of school and then doing that 8-year time skip, seeing where everyone was at with like their hero rankings and what they were doing, and then seeing that All Might had been working on this suit for Midoriya and he got to go and still do hero work while also teaching and helping like the next generation, many of which we had met before. I felt like that was about as good of a end as a show like that could have. I don't have that many more like honest opinions because I do really like this show, but it's not in my top 10, so I don't have quite as many like very strict opinions about it. I think the best thing about this show was the Todoroki family. That whole arc was the most well done, very complicated. You know, you're dealing with these characters where they are generally bad people, like Endeavor. Endeavor is a bad person. Toya, who turned into Dabi, you know, became a bad person. But they really did such a good job at like the development and the nuances of a family in that kind of situation. A lot of people say they wish Endeavor like had died or had gotten more punishment for what he did. I think the fact that he knew that his son became a villain and he had to pretty much kill him because Dabi was pretty much dead by the end of it, I think that's a pretty bad punishment. It does punish the entire family when he was the cause of all of the issues. I don't think he had to die to atone for what he did. I think that he maybe needed a little bit more. We needed to see him atone a little bit more. But I do think that the show did a very good job at just like introducing the complexities of what happens when someone on the good side isn't good. So I do want to talk about some of the things that I really liked about the story. While I don't think they like hit this theme out of the park, I did find it very interesting how they explored the fact that a lot of the heroes were not good people. And a lot of the heroes were in it for just the money, just the fame. They were very selfish people who were very bad people behind the scenes, but they technically fought on the correct side because they were the heroes. And they make it very obvious by calling them heroes and villains, but the villains are actually very well developed. They have opinions that are not necessarily wrong. They just go about it the wrong way. And I think they make it a lot more gray than like Demon Slayer does, because there's a lot of times throughout the story where you genuinely kind of are cheering for the villain. And I think that like Endeavor's kind of at the front of the idea that like heroes are not always good people. And one of the things that they very much explore is the fact that even some of the heroes that were like good people were still so self-sacrificing for humanity and for strangers that at the end of the day, they gave up, like they did their families wrong. You know, that happened with, what's her name? Shimura? Was that the person who had One for All Before All Might? I think so. You know, like she sent her son away, and at the end of the day, like her doing that actually is what grew Shigaraki into what he became. So I really like that they explored how in a world where they try to make good and evil black and white when it isn't, that can fester even worse things to happen, and that a lot of the people who are good are not actually good. They're just hiding behind a facade that is good. I think they could have gone into that storyline even better, but I do still think it was a very interesting plot point and probably one of the better plot points of the story. Todoroki Shoto is my favorite character in the show, again, because I felt like the Todoroki family story was probably the most interesting part of the story. I really liked his development because he's a character that like had every right to remain the way he was at the beginning. He had every right to stay like very resentful towards his dad and not want to do what, you know, his dad wanted him to do. But him kind of letting go of that resentfulness, even though I don't think he ever truly forgave his dad, really led him down a path of not even redemption, because he was never like, he always wanted to do the right thing. He just was very resentful, like stubborn. I'm not going to do that. And he seemed very cold, pun intended, I guess, because he was half cold and that was the only thing he was using at the time. He grew and he like kind of walked down this path of forgiving his dad, even though you wouldn't blame him if he never did. And some people would say he shouldn't have, but I think that, you know, Todoroki goes through a very human story where sometimes you do like get into that point where you can forgive the people who wronged you and move forward, and that like opens up new doors for you. So I found his character arc to just be so interesting. His backstory was really quite terrifying, like very sad and very Zuko-esque. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like him better than Midoriya. I think my own personal preference, and this is like a very opinion-based thing, so take this as a grain of salt for this video. I realized that the more trauma a character has in their like backstory that led them to where they're at, the more I'm gonna like them. And I think that's one of the reasons why Midoriya never quite got there for me, is yes, he had the trauma of being quirkless, he had the trauma of in a world where quirks reigned supreme, he didn't have one, and he was subject to bullying and not being able to follow through on his dream. At the same time, I couldn't relate to the idea that he never just moved on from his one dream and just was like, I'm nothing if I'm a hero. But we never learned about his dad, which I guess is one thing that I kind of wish we did, like what happened to his dad. But I couldn't get behind his story because he just like kind of forced himself into this traumatic world. All of his trauma happens during the story. This is gonna sound so funny. I like it when the character has trauma from the beginning, which pushes them into the world and then continues to get trauma. Is that like really bad? Do I need to go to therapy? Maybe. Anyway, that's why I like Todoroki probably better than Midoriya. Midoriya still is right up there, but Todoroki is my favorite character in the show. Now, I would not be able to get through this video, I have 5 minutes left, without talking about my issue with many of the main cast. I felt like the story had far too many characters and did not know what to do with them. They had so much time to develop so many of them, and yet they didn't. I feel like even within Class 1A, which I believe was 30 kids, 20 or 30, half of them I still barely know, and I never really got to know about them. Unfortunately, most of the female cast had little to no development, and also all of them were dressed in skin-tight clothes while the guys all get to be in like different clothes. Yes, that bothered me a lot, especially because these are like 15-year-olds. So like I just question like why we have to specifically put all of the girls in skin-tight clothes with huge boobs. Like why? It is a shonen trope, so there is a portion of like you just have to accept that that's a part of shonen. I still push back on that and say why, but I digress. I felt the story introduced too many characters and was very good at character development, but the cast should have been way smaller. That was one of my biggest issues, is I felt like we had so much time, because the way the pacing of the story was actually kind of the pacing I almost wish Demon Slayer was more like, where we got more time to breathe. We got more time to like chill out. I didn't like season 5's pacing. Season 5 is still the thorn in my side. That's not a good season in my opinion, but I know some people like it, but I did not like it the first time and I did not like it the second time. But there was so much time. When you think about the fact that this was an 8-season show that took place over the course of 1 year, it's incredible to me that instead of developing the characters that were already established, they just kept introducing more, and it got to the point where it's overwhelming, and there were just so many characters that I couldn't care less about, couldn't remember their names, couldn't remember their stories, which rereading or rewatching it definitely helped, because there were some characters that showed up later that I had forgotten about because there were so many long hiatuses. They could have done so much more with such a big cast with the time that they had, because it's not like they didn't have time. They could have introduced less, yes, but they also could have worked on developing more of them. So that's something I wish it had done differently. I also think that I actually would have liked it better if it had just been built in a way where everything that happened, instead of taking place during their literal first year of school, took place over all 3 years of school. It just felt to me like so funny that we had 160 episodes that took place over a year, and then the final episode took place over like 12 years. I think it would have made the story more cohesive, in my opinion, if like Shigaraki versus Midoriya had been like at the end of school and they had had these 3 years to just develop their quirks. It would have taken the same pacing, like having these training arcs, having these fights, but taking it over the course of 3 years. I would have just preferred if it had gone that route, I think. I don't know if I can really call that a critique or just a comment of like something I wish they had done. I think their payoff at the end would have felt better if it was like, we defeated Shigaraki, that was the end of our time at UA, and then like Midoriya's quirk kind of fades away. I think that just would have made more sense, because the fact that it took us so long to get through 1 year made the growth of the characters feel both really freaking long because it was such a long show, but also in hindsight really short because it only took place over a year. So those are like my biggest issues. But overall, as one cohesive piece, it was really quite good. So I'm gonna actually start tier listing each one of these animes each time I do it. So this one I'm gonna put solidly in A. I would give it a 7.5 out of 10 overall. It's gonna be hard to do these with everyone because every single anime that I watch is not complete. So I'm not gonna be able to have a full, complete understanding of the story when I make the video. But it was really quite good. Like a 7.5 out of 10 in my opinion is quite good. I didn't have that many gripes, just mainly that I wish there was more time with characters, but the show didn't need to be longer. The show just needed to do a better job at developing everyone. I don't know. Like, I'm not a writer, so I can't really say that I could write it better, but those are just some of the things that I noticed. But the story was very good, the animation was very good, the music is amazing, like it was overall just such a good show, and I felt like the ending was as good as it could be. Alright, so that was 20 minutes. I did find the final battle, I know I'm going over time, I found the final battle to be a little bit anticlimactic. There was something about the way it ended where it was like there was this big back and forth between Midoriya and Shigaraki this entire time. For Midoriya to like show up in his subconscious, hold his hands, and that was pretty much it. it felt like there needed to be more, but I don't really know what could have been more. So I did find the final battle to be, it felt very quick, it felt very rushed, even though the show had been going for so long, but it also felt very anticlimactic. So I would say, I think season 4 was my favorite season. That's the season where we went after Overhaul. That was a very good season, and when I watched it again, I was like, this season's really freaking good. So I think season 4 is my favorite season. I did enjoy like 6 and 7. 8 just felt a little bit less exciting to me, and I think it's partially because we watched it after they all came out, and I saw on IMDb that every single episode was like over 9, and I was like expecting it to be some masterpiece, and it wasn't quite that. It wasn't bad, it just left something to be desired, in my opinion. But like I said, overall, the story was very good. The characters were good. Like, it was very good. So that's my opinion on My Hero Academia in about 20 minutes. Obviously, I went a little bit over. But what do you think? What did you think of My Hero Academia? Did you like it? Do you agree with my points? Again, if you disagree, totally fine to comment. Just keep it respectful. But that is going to be it for today's video. If you liked it, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment your thoughts. And I will see you all in the next one. Mata ne!